And I'm Jamie from King Voodoo.
And you're watching the Paranormal Brew.
Good evening, everyone. Kenny Biddle's already here. Thanks, Ken. He's already here saying hi. So we're rocking out. Hi, Patricia. So everybody that does not know me that's joining because of this wonderful gentleman here, Loyd, correct me if I say your last name wrong, Auerbach?
That's right.
Yay! Okay, good. So Loyd Auerbach was a referral from my good friend Kenny, which I have been looking forward to this interview since the day I scheduled it with you. Parapsychologist, MS. The MS, what does that stand for?
It's a master's in science.
Master's in science. Thank gosh, I have a legit parapsychologist. You don't know how long I've been wanting to have someone like you on. So I'm excited. Not only that, the parapsychology part of it, but also everything else that, like in your bio that I read, very much so, including the chocolatier thing. I'm so interested in that as well. So how do you get all into that, which is amazing. I love chocolate. So I want to get into all of that. So if you could just maybe tell, like, I guess start at the beginning, you know, how you got into what you got into and how you got to where you are now.
So my whole life story, in other words.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, there's questions in between.
Well, you know, I've been interested in the paranormal since I was a kid. I originally psychic abilities, but I can remember, and I've kind of revisited seeing shows on TV when I was a little kid, like Topper, of course, Casper the Friendly Ghost, but there was Topper, which is a major influence on me even years later. My dad worked for NBC, and I had a TV set in my room when I was 2. So in fact, I was on TV apparently when I was 6 months old as a placeholder. My dad was working a stage manager. I was placeholder when a guest was late for a talk show.
Oh, so cool.
My mom was there with me. So I guess I grew up in the TV industry, but I also was, because my dad was actually at one point on the team that was covering the Mercury and Gemini space shots. I became a little science geek. Very interested in astronomy and astrophysics and geology and all sorts of stuff. But the mythology, comic books were a big influence on me, still are to some extent. And that got me looking into whether or not there was anything to people's psychic abilities. And essentially, after I started watching Dark Shadows in the 60s and heard the word parapsychology and went to the library and found books on parapsychology by some of the key folks in the field, like J.B. Rhine and J.G. Pratt and Gertrude Schmeidler and people like that. So in my high school, that was in junior high and high school, I had a couple of teachers who were science teachers, physics and earth science, who agreed to sponsor a parapsychology club that we had out in our high school outside of New York. And I was able to, through a neighbor, meet a couple of major parapsychologists in the New York area, in the Westchester County area. We didn't do ghost hunting. We focused on doing like ESP experiments and talking to these 2 researchers, Montague Ullman and Gertrude Schmeidler, about their research. And that got me really hooked into doing parapsychology. I wanted to become a parapsychologist. In college, because there was no undergraduate anything at that point, I started out in astrophysics. I'll be honest and say the math killed me. So it wasn't my friend. This was at Northwestern.
Math is not a friend of mine either.
Yeah, but I did spend a little time with J. Allen Hynek at Northwestern, the UFO man, and even volunteered at the Center for UFO Studies. And he was very knowledgeable about parapsychology. So that was a really good thing too. And then I switched to anthropology at Northwestern, and several of my professors were teaching courses on the anthropology of the supernatural. So I focused heavily on supernatural folklore. And through a series of good timing pieces, found out about a parapsychology master's program at JFK University here in California, and was able to attend that for my master's program.
It's amazing.
After that, I worked in New York at the American Society for Psychical Research, then came back to JFK on faculty when we still had a parapsychology program, and also ended up I was doing investigations from my first semester at JFK, actually in 1979. So I've been doing investigations since then. I actually decided in grad school that I didn't want to be in the laboratory because I hated statistics. So I liked the research was cool, but I didn't want it. I figured one of my professors actually asked me, so if you hate statistics, what are you going to do if you do research? I said, hire a statistician. So,
yeah, right.
hire somebody who knows more than I do. But I also ended up learning magic in that graduate program from a local magician. We had a class on psychic fraud. And so I ended up starting to perform magic. So I kind of have a portfolio career where I've been a parapsychologist, and almost as long I've been a magician and professional mentalist, psychic entertainer.
So, okay. Yeah, this is like amazing. So, parapsychology, definition.
It is the scientific study of how human consciousness interacts with the world around us through non-sensory means and non-instrumental means. So basically, we study extrasensory perception, which is information flow without the use of the normal senses or without logical inference. It is how consciousness directly affects matter and energy, affects the material world, which includes our own bodies, by the way, that we call that psychokinesis. Mm-hmm. And we look at the idea of consciousness surviving the death of the body and the phenomena that are around that. That's where the ghosts and reincarnation, all that stuff comes in as well. Right. We apply in the laboratory, and as much as we can, which is not always possible, in fact, it's mostly not possible, outside the laboratory, we do apply the scientific method in the laboratory. Outside the lab, it's a lot harder in the naturalistic environment. That's not just for our field, but for a lot of fields, for that matter.
I would say inside the lab, you have control of
right.
your environment, you
can't completely control things outside the lab.
So, do you believe in the afterlife?
Well, yeah. So here's the thing. The evidence was there. I mean, there's over 140 years of history in this field, going back to even before the Society for Psychical Research in 1882. There's a lot of literature. In fact, there's a huge amount of literature that's available for free through the Internet Archive. And it kind of, I don't know, it really makes me upset when I hear one of the ghost hunters from TV or ghost hunting groups say that there's no literature.
Right.
Yeah, especially since we have a lot of literature and a lot of it's, and not just the laboratory stuff. So the literature is very compelling that there is absolutely that, and even in the anthropological literature, there are experiences people have that we have classified as seemingly supportive of consciousness existing after death, survival of bodily death. And over the years, there's been more and more of it, of course, in more recent times because of an emphasis of applying parapsychological science outside the laboratory and interviewing people looking for alternative explanations, which we do that all the time. That's our first kind of step in any investigation. And then some of my own cases had convinced me that, at least for a time, people can survive the death of their body. I do tend to think that there is some other form of existence. I don't buy into any particular way it looks, partly because, to go back to something from science fiction and philosophy, it's probably more different than we can possibly imagine.
Right. Yeah. I tend to say, like, because everybody, there's research for so many different things: cryptids, UFOs, aliens, men in black, ghosts, spirits, whatever you want to call it.
And so much is not related.
Right. And for me, I always think, like, what if it's all about the perception of what you are researching or what you're looking for or what you're you're picking up on.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's easy for me to relate to what a ghost, quote unquote, a ghost would be, or a spirit, or, as the person sitting next to me might say, well, I believe in Bigfoot. So whatever it is that you're picking up on, it looks like that, but it looks like this to me.
Right. I have no problem with Bigfoot being a big ape.
Right.
Primate, but I have a problem with Bigfoot. I just don't even know what to do with it when people say that Bigfoot is an extra dimensional being from another time. It's like, I don't know what to do with that.
Right. I know. And that's the thing. I have a lot of people that I have somebody that does a paranormal question of the day, and That's almost like the portals and the vortexes. Like I believe in the true meaning of it, the true definition of, like, I looked it up. So the Webster Dictionary, I looked up portal and it said, something, I believe that, not that it's an opening for something to come in and out of this.
No, a door is a portal.
Right. I believe in that. And a vortex is a vortex. There's quarries.
Right.
There's
A tornado is a vortex. Right.
So I believe in that. But
Yeah.
I don't believe in it being a doorway for
there's no evidence that we have in our field that suggests that you need a doorway. So
right.
You don't need, if you're a spirit, you don't need a doorway. There's
Exactly.
nothing that says that that's necessary.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I was reading over. Well, first of all, I never heard of the Office of Paranormal Investigations.
All right. So that was an outgrowth of the JFK parapsychology program.
Okay.
What happened was we were getting all the calls at JFK. We were the only graduate program in the United States that was accredited. And through a series of circumstances, including a new university president who had it in for us, which is not unusual, who was teaming up with the law school dean, who also had it in for us because we were getting publicity and he was not. And then we also had some outside funding, which unfortunately fell by the wayside because of that company that was funding us. It was a private company and they were funding us. They were a commercial real estate company. And in the 1980s, there was a crash of commercial real estate. So not only did our program go away, but so did the guy's company. So we decided that since, JFK was still getting calls and that was becoming onerous since there was nobody, necessarily on site. I mean, we had office hours when we had faculty, when I was teaching regularly in a program. And once our office went away, a friend of mine, Christopher Chacon, who was a magician, and I set up this Office of Paranormal Investigation, which essentially was an answering service with a live person answering people's calls. We would take the calls then. I had former students, so graduates of the parapsychology program, people who had taken the courses, and then colleagues of mine around the country. And we would deal with the cases in the Bay Area and in the general area of California, and then farm out the other cases. And over the years, it's been really more of a network than an actual office. We had aspirations of actually having a physical office, but it's my home office. That's the Office of Paranormal Investigations. So.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So you basically, it's almost like you have like a network of people that you would reach out to. You get a phone call and you say, oh, these people are having issues.
Right.
I have somebody that I can reach out to and send your way or whatever. That's pretty cool.
I have a lot of students now who've taken courses from me here locally in the Bay Area when we had some local courses I was teaching in the 2010s, and also the students who've gone through the field courses for the Rhine Education Center, the Rhine Research Center. In fact, I'm teaching that course again starting on May 4th. And
then in order for somebody to take the course, though, what credentials do they have to have? This is
non-academic. The Rhine Education Center we have students who take it towards a certificate, in which case, in fact, Kenny Biddle was a co-teacher of mine with one of the certificate courses on the skeptical approach to parapsychology.
Yes.
And these courses are either you take them for a grade, there's reading, there's quizzes, there's weekly discussion.
I'm interested, to be honest with you.
They're totally online. You can watch a recording or participate in the live class. Or we have about half the students typically take them for fun or for just personal interest, and they don't necessarily participate, in any of the discussions or anything like that. But they still take the classes. So the ones who go for a grade, for example, in the field investigations course, they become part of the Office of Paranormal Network.
Gotcha. I was told, and I cannot remember who told me this, and this is why I find it. When I first saw the word parapsychology, before I was even delving into it or learning about it, I automatically thought it had something to do with paranormal stuff, right? I started, asking around, and I was told by all these people, no parapsychologist is going to come on. They don't like to associate with paranormal stuff. They think it's
I have other colleagues who'd be happy to do it. So,
yeah. Okay. So that was false I was told that, and I was like, really? I'm like, well, don't they kind of do the same, only they do it. It's like your research is obviously more science, like you said, inside of a lab, which you have the access to do all that stuff. Which a lot of your books that I wrote down. I was like, wow, like I was going to say, let's pick one and talk whichever your favorite subject is and talk about, because you have a very long list of interesting books or, books you wrote about, which I love the idea. And it's funny because the other day I had somebody on that she talks about astral projection and out of body and near death, and then also remote viewing.
Mhm.
And she's like, I want somebody to medically monitor me. I don't know if how somebody would do that. This was just the other day. It's weird that this is all kind of like happening at the same time. But she wants, while she's having going through this, she wants to be like medically monitored, and once
that may be possible. We're doing that sort of thing. Folks in our field are doing that sort of thing with mediums,
yeah.
doing, just EEG monitoring, some other monitoring as well. So it's biometric monitoring. It's not something we can do except in a few places because there's very little funding for the field of parapsychology. We can do it in some places.
So, and that would be cool. And she's like, and I would tell them, go live with it, let's do it live and show everybody what we come up with. Like, she's like all about it, like open, and she wants to do it. But when you said you were at the study of the supernatural, right?
Anthropology of the supernatural. We actually, in parapsychology, we don't even use that term, but in anthropology you do.
Okay. Can you explain?
Yeah, anthropologists, studied about people's supernatural practices around the supernatural, beliefs around the supernatural, and around the divine. It's really the anthropology of religion. The anthropology of the supernatural falls under the header of the anthropology of religion. In fact, so do any witchcraft or sorcery practices, any magical practices in various cultures fall under that rubric of anthropology of religion. That may seem kind of bizarre in Western culture, considering that religion stays as far away from that as possible. Right. But most religions are supernatural in their belief. Right. Yeah. So whether they want to admit it or not, it's supernatural. It's above nature. In fact, I get asked all the time, how come you guys don't do anything with demons? It's like, well, first of all, personally, I don't believe in demons. Mm-hmm. Wasn't raised to believe in demons in Reform Judaism. And on top of that, if there are demons of the biblical type, they are of God, and God is supernatural or preternatural, above what science can even deal with, unknowable. How can we deal with that?
Right. Yeah, and that's my, I always wonder, like, when you do have skeptics and stuff, it's hard. Like, what do you think about EVPs?
I am of mixed feelings about EVPs. Very, mm-hmm. very mixed feelings. I think, first of all, they become so popular because television made them popular, not because mm-hmm. there's any real good support for them consistently being good. There's way too much interpretation going on. Mm-hmm. I've been presented with EVPs by people. Sometimes you can really clearly make them out. And I've had a couple analyzed that are really interesting looking at the sound analysis of them. And in fact, I had a late colleague of mine when he was alive. He was a digital forensics specialist analyzing voice for the FBI and the Department of Justice. And he was into EVP. And mm-hmm. he could actually analyze an apparent EVP and tell you whether it was an acoustical sound that was picked up by a microphone, or if it's got some unusual properties to it as a sound that doesn't actually fit an acoustical sound or some glitch, for example. Right. He could do that. But most of the EVPs I hear, people tell me it's saying, "Hi, Loyd." It's like, no, it's sounding bleh. I don't even know how to spell that. So
right. I would be interested to know, because sometimes I'll hear it and I repeat it, and on the recorder it sounds exactly what was said, and then I say it. Right.
So there's an issue here. First of all, EVP means, which is electronic voice phenomena.
Correct.
It is, by definition, voice created within the device or on the recording medium. Mm-hmm. You should not need a microphone for that. In fact, technically, you should block your microphone so that you're not picking up any external noise whatsoever, because too much of it is subvocalization. It's somebody moving around in their chair. It is somebody's stomach rumble. There's too many different possibilities. Even a sound that you did not notice that if you
Right.
have a directional mic, one directional mic might have picked it up and another one did not.
Right.
So there's that. So now if it's created in the device,
How would it be?
well, within our field, there was something called psychokinesis, mind over matter.
Right. Right.
And there's an awful lot of data and research that's shown of people affecting random event generators and other devices. In fact, there was a whole study that was done on human machine interaction back in the late 70s through the 80s, some of which was funded by the government. And it seems that people, for example, and honestly, on a informal basis, I've talked to hardware and software people in Silicon Valley, and they notice this sort of thing too. The people who are stressed out or upset around devices without even operating the device, that a device fails or has a problem, at least temporarily for that. There are also functionally people who make things work better than they should be able to. So that's psychokinesis. That is a form of unconscious mind over matter. And we think that that's what's going on with a lot of EVP.
Wow.
The question is this psychokinesis by a spirit, or is this psychokinesis by the unconscious of an operator who really, really wants to get EVP?
An answer. Right.
And I know some of the people I've talked to over the years, when I hear from a ghost hunting group that, Joe in our group always gets EVP wherever we go. It's like, yeah, there's something about Joe. It's not like a ghost is following him around.
Right.
Doing this.
Right. Wow. That's interesting. I have so many questions that are like going through my head because you brought up psychokinesis. Now, psychokinesis, do you think that's poltergeist?
Well, poltergeist within our field, poltergeist, since it is physical activity, and really the definition of a poltergeist versus, let's say, an apparition or another ghost case, is that the activity is, with rare exception, physical, which means that if 5 people are present and there's activity, every one of those 5 people, if they're looking in the right direction, they'll see things move, but they should all experience something because it is physical.
Right.
All right. So that's an important factor. And we don't have a lot of physical activity associated with most apparition cases, some, but not all. So a model evolved in the early 20th century. It was first put forth by folks like Nandor Fodor, who was a psychoanalyst in training, but also did a lot of investigations. And he suggested that it was the unconscious of a living person that was taken up by J.G. Pratt and mainly William Roll in the late 1950s. And out of a case on Long Island in 58, Roll came up with a model of recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, that under certain stresses, certain people, their unconscious mind kind of lashes out, relieves stress by causing physical, typically destruction, chaos. That we have since evolved that to know that in a percentage of those cases, there is another common factor. And that is that about 30% of the people of a couple of different sets of poltergeist agents, when they were checked out after the fact, they had either epilepsy or epileptiform activity in their temporal lobes.
Oh, wow.
So there was a neurological connection in some instances as well. But we tend to look at poltergeist activity as being living human related, not dead guy.
That's how I've always looked at it. Always. And I always say that, and is it true that they find that it's younger teenagers going through the change, or is that just kind of a myth?
Well, I mean, we could partly relate or lay the blame at the feet of Stephen King for making Carrie a teenage girl. So, because I always hear from people, it's like, isn't it a teenage girl? It's like, okay, here's the deal. 60% of poltergeist agents tend to be adolescents, maybe as young as 11 into their 20s. But of course, the teenage years are right in the middle. And if we're dealing with stress as a kind of stimulus here, then obviously puberty is a major stress.
Right.
And of course, teens are possessed anyway. So
exactly. Oh, I was an
I've gotten calls over the years. I've gotten calls over the years from parents who were concerned that their daughter or son was possessed, and they start describing it and say, "Oh, you have a 16-year-old teenage boy, don't you?" So that's one piece of it. But stresses can come, and of course, the neurological stuff can come at any age. In that group of 60%, depending on where you're talking about, it male female follows the population statistics typically.
Okay.
So there can be more female than male in some populations and more male than female. One of the other things is how active. We don't see poltergeist agents where the person is physically active, typically, like on a sports team or something like that, because they're blowing off steam some other way.
Gotcha. Are there usually like psychological stuff involved with that?
Well, I mean, stress is psychological and emotional.
Yeah.
So it can be anything from issues with school to, issues with one's job, marital issues. If it's,
I'm surprised my house hasn't imploded.
Yeah. Grief can do it too. There's a number of things that can put us into that stress set.
Yeah.
And then there are many things. The whole idea of human machine interaction studies found that people under stress who are frustrated can have problems with their devices. And, I've over the years talked to people about this. I used to give college lectures before the TV shows, and the paranormal celebrities got all the lectures. And I would ask the audience.
I would have you at my lecture for sure.
Thank you. I used to ask how many of you have had a problem when you're really under deadline pressure and you're really stressed out that your computer freaks out or your printer doesn't work, and almost everybody's had that experience. Now, there's a couple possibilities, one of which is Windows.
Right.
Of course, just simply your computer is having problems.
Oh,
it also is possible when you're stressed out, you're hitting the wrong keys or a combination of keys that causes a problem.
Right.
But then there's that small percentage where it seems to be related to our emotions, to our stresses.
Wow. So you believe that a lot of this is human driven,
living human driven.
Living human driven.
We still consider apparitions as humans.
Okay.
Dead human,
okay, I got you.
Disembodied humans.
So you believe in dead humans?
I believe in dead humans. Yeah. I mean, they don't have a body anymore, but they're still pretty human. And all the evidence over the last 140 years indicates that people don't really change their personality. And with the apparitions, the ghosts that people see and interact with, whether they're real or not, they don't change their personality from when they were alive, other than possibly reacting to a circumstance that is outside their experience.
Kenny's being funny. Transparent perished beings.
Yeah, Kenny, you and I need to talk about some other terminology we can use. Sure. We need to come up with a whole new lexicon.
Oh, yeah. And then he made a joke about it. Is the audio out of sync for anybody else because of electronic devices and stuff, I guess?
He must be stressed out.
Yes. Let's see. Hold on a second. Up here was a question, and I think it was when we were talking about, so how can we use parapsychology within quantum physics due to all things equaling zero?
Well, I think if you talk to quantum physicists who are at all knowledgeable about what we're doing in parapsychology or just consciousness research, consciousness is a big term that is bandied about in quantum physics, although it doesn't mean necessarily human consciousness the way it's worked out. There are a number of experiments that have been done to see whether or not we can observation causes a change in subatomic particles. There's the quantum slit experiment, and using a human being as kind of the interacting observer. And that whole observer effect suggests at least that there's something to do with how our consciousness or how the consciousness of the observer sets the wave function, more or less. I mean, there are things that are connected there. It really, and also I've got a couple of physicist friends, one of whom actually is heavily involved, of course, in parapsychology research. Ed May, who ran the remote viewing program for the Army, for the government for a number of years, is a physicist. And
Whoa.
He and other quantum physicists have kind of looked at the issue of even the arrow of time, which doesn't seem to be one way at the quantum level. So there's a lot of interesting things at that level of reality. But one of the other flip sides is I hear sometimes people talking about applying quantum physics as if that's what's going on at the macro level with psychic ability. And we can't say that really for sure. There's people who are hypothesizing that's the spooky action at a distance, the entanglement factor which happens at the quantum level has been shown to actually happens at the macro level, but that can't be exactly how ESP works, because how would my perception or thought get translated to a quanta and then transferred, the information transferred and then scaled up to somebody else's head?
Right.
So we have several levels, several ways that we have to consider how
I mean, that would kind of be like that would be like telepathy, wouldn't it? I mean, telepathy.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about for telepathy. You know, when you talk about telepathy, if it's at the quantum level,
right,
how do how did the information get to the quantum level? And then when it was received by somebody, there's a neurological issue, your quantum issue, a physics issue, a neurological issue, and a psychological issue.
Right.
And unless those things are really rectified, unless we can figure out how, we can't use quantum physics except as a metaphor for things. That's the best we can do with it.
Absolutely. That made sense. 1000%. George Pickett. So can you ask him what is his most ghost-like experience was? What your most...
I assume that doesn't mean me being a ghost. I've done that
your most dead human experience.
Yeah. You know, I think I've had several. You know, first of all, I've never seen a ghost. Now, and I do want to explain that when people say they see a ghost, they're clearly not seeing an optical phenomenon, because otherwise other people in the room would see it as well. That's one reason why you couldn't photograph something. But it's a perceptual phenomenon. So in other words, there's a perception of something that is translated into an image in your perceptions. So I've never actually seen a ghost, but I have actually felt, been patted on the back and had my arm squeezed on the USS Hornet aircraft carrier museum, with good reason for both of those things, at a really interesting situational time. I have had one of my first cases that actually convinced me, I guess, pushed me over the edge from just evidence. The evidence supports this too. Personally, I believe this was a case I had back in 1985 with a family where all four of the members of the family had been separately seeing a woman's ghost, the woman who used to live in the house. And then it turned out that a year and a half into this, their son started saying some stuff to his mom, which indicated that he had information about some antiques they bought in the estate sale for the house that they couldn't find any paperwork on. And when asked, he said, "Oh yeah, you know, Lois told me." Well, who's Lois? You know, the ghost that you, dad, and grandma are seeing but aren't talking about to each other. And apparently this kid was communicating with her, and we actually had a sit down with the kid, the mother, her mother, who also, all three of them had seen the ghost at different times, but the kid is communicating with the ghost, and we're able to ask questions. And I was given, I mean, we were given stories about the history of the town, which I completely discounted as evidence, because the kid could easily have found that stuff out.
Right, sure.
But this woman the woman who died only had one living relative, and he was in an assisted living facility. And the sale of the house was actually through an attorney. The owners, the people I was dealing with, had never been able to get to the one living relative. The cousin who actually was involved was the inheritor, the executor of the estate. So the kid is telling me family stories, and even how to contact this guy. And the amount of information, if he had found journals, his mom would absolutely have found them. She was a very sharp attorney, and she actually started looking for stuff the moment they got into that house. And he would have had to have memorized all sorts of stuff. And when I talked to this guy, the relative, I could start a story and he would finish it, which was very bizarre.
Wow.
In many respects. So that was something that was either this kid is the most psychic kid in the world in a really unusual way, or there really was an apparition there.
Yeah.
There was one other thing that happened, which was when I asked, this was all around the time of, right after Ghostbusters. And so the ghost was concerned that we would, according to the boy, the ghost was concerned we'd bring our blasters with us, you know, the proton packs.
Oh, yeah.
Because she had been watching TV with him and saw a commercial for it. So apparently, according to the boy, she got to the university where we started from, myself and the two others, and listened in on our conversation to make sure we wouldn't talk about getting rid of her. And so when I asked the kid, I found this out after I said, "Does Lois have any questions for us?" And besides the question of, "Do you guys use stuff from Ghostbusters?" And I said, no, I kind of laughed about that. Asked me a direct question based on the conversation that we had in the car.
Wow.
Specific to me, to my wife at the time, who was in the car with us, and the other student who was a psychology student who we were getting to know a little bit better, who was taking courses in parapsychology as well. Stuff I didn't know, Joanna didn't know. I mean, it was stuff that was unknown. So they would have had to bug my car to do this. And this was not a family that, I mean, they didn't want publicity. They didn't want anything out of this. This was not anything going forward past that. So that was the case that kind of pushed me over the edge.
So do you believe in reincarnation?
We in our field, we look at children who remember previous lives specifically. I don't believe the past life regression is providing any sort of evidence for reincarnation at all. I don't know what to make of reincarnation. I find, I'm conflicted because people ask me, don't you want to know what your past life is? It's like, not necessarily. I'm not sure that it matters to me at all.
Right.
But the cases with some of these cases with kids that have been solved where the child was young enough, there was no contamination of information, no possible way that the kid could have gotten the information or the family could have gotten the information until the investigator got involved and was able to track down who this person was that the kid is remembering. There's something incredibly interesting going on there. I don't know whether it's their spirits being reincarnated or there's memory somehow that is being downloaded from the cloud, so to speak, into this kid's head for the time being. I'm not sure exactly what's happening there. It doesn't appear at all to be possession in any way, shape, or form. There's too much of a pattern to this whole thing anyway. And when the kids forget is also part of the pattern. So this is one of the more interesting things. In fact, one of my materialist friends, who's a parapsychologist, who doesn't believe in survival otherwise, he's fascinated by these cases. He doesn't believe in reincarnation, but he feels that this is an amazing thing that he is baffled because he's a physicist. He's baffled why psychologists are not interested in this.
I am too. I remember I didn't believe in it at all. Right. I didn't believe that. And then I remember PBS used to have these shows on every once in a while. And I remember they had a show on and it was a 4-year-old. Now this 4-year-old, eventually I guess was having stuff happen at home, was telling the parents, who he was, like saying this name over and over again. And I lived in this house and I lived in this, and it was like across the, like the other side of the United States. And long story short, she finally gets in touch with people that are going to come in, doctors and psychologists and, this and that, and people that are taught, and they brought out a book of all these pictures of these men that look similar. And they said, well, who were you? He pointed exactly to the person that he looked us up. He said, I was in a movie. I was a stand, like a backup, like in the background, like not like, he was an extra. And he said, in the part you see me in the movie, I take shotguns and I put them into a shotgun case. You see me in the background. Sure enough, they looked this guy up. He was in that movie. They find the exact scene and it's like not like one of the movies, that had Marilyn Monroe in it or anything.
Right.
It wasn't this well known. And I'm watching this and I'm like, how old is this kid? And the parents are clearly upset. They're crying. They're like, what do we just want to help him? He's like, we feel he doesn't rest well. He's unrested because so they take him out to where he supposedly lived and his grave, everything. Like he told them everything. And I'm watching this show. Now, granted, I'm like, okay, this is TV.
Right.
I'm like, this is TV. It was a documentary, but it's still TV.
Well, the folks at the University of Virginia have, there's a place in the medical school called the Division of Perceptual Studies. Jim Tucker is the person who's currently focused on reincarnation cases, these types of cases. Ian Stevenson was the predecessor and the person who started this kind of investigation back in 1960. And there's available to the public all sorts of research reports on these kinds of cases for free. If you just simply Google Division of Perceptual Studies, it's at the University of Virginia, and you'll get right to it. There's a lot of information about their apparition studies and near-death experiences. These are medical doctors and psychologists, and these are top-notch folks in the medical school that we're dealing with. And the interesting thing is that Carl Sagan, who was a skeptic, in his book, I think it was The Demon Haunted World, he mentioned a few things in parapsychology that demanded, or really support, there should be something to it, and we all need to look into it. And one of them was children who remember previous lives. Because it's a phenomena that just makes, you can toss out the reincarnation explanation. Let's just say there's no reincarnation.
Right.
What the hell's going on?
Right.
That's
Right.
the question. What the hell, and why aren't you studying it?
Right.
If you don't think it's reincarnation, great. Study
Then
it.
what? Yeah. What
It's
is it?
still
Like,
amazing.
how? How is it happening? How did he
Yeah.
do that? My friend said, dude from Texas, there's a boy right now I read somewhere he claims he is, and he corrected himself later on, Lou Gehrig. He said he picked out pictures from old photos and talked about his teammates and everything, even Babe Ruth.
Yeah, I think that's the case. The book is like, I think there's a book called The Boy Who Knew Too Much on that. And I believe that there may, I did hear from somebody, another researcher, that there's some question about some of the information the kid actually came up with may have actually been contamination.
Well, I mean, it's Lou Gehrig.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, and I
mean, if you ask anybody, any teenager today who's not a baseball fan, who Lou Gehrig was, they'll have no idea.
right. I know, but it's easily like, maybe heard conversation, whatever.
Yeah, right, right.
Whereas the one that I saw, this guy was like he was a nobody, this guy. And I mean that respectfully.
Well, and there's a lot of cases that Stevenson and Tucker have done. Stevenson, especially, most of the cases he dealt with initially were from India and Sri Lanka and Lebanon and Turkey, places where reincarnation was talked about as a belief. An anthropologist named Antonia Mills got involved a number of years ago, looking at the Inuits and other indigenous peoples and their beliefs in reincarnation, and found, again, cases of kids with the reincarnation type and similar types of things where there's no possible contamination,
right,
unless the parents had decided. This is a key element. Did the parents decide to try to figure out and contact someone, do research themselves to figure out who this person was? Then we have to look back and say, well, maybe there was some contamination. They don't even remember that they contaminated the case.
Right. Before we get into, so just so you know, are you okay if we go like 10, 15 minutes over?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm set for as long.
Okay. All right. Because I definitely want to talk about the chocolate stuff, but I still want to, like, I'm still here. I could probably have you on for 4 hours and have like an amazing, not that I'm going to, I'm just saying, somebody had, my friend Darren, do you think we come back as animals or past life versions of ourselves as far as reincarnation goes? I think he's just joining us. So
yeah, the animal thing, I know psychics talk about that, and certain religions believe that.
Right.
There's nothing we can do about it. We can't ask. There's no way to interview the witness at that point. I mean, does the dog actually remember his past life?
Yeah.
That happens in the movies, of course, but those dogs can talk. So at least you could ask them questions.
And I think my fur babies are very smart and understand every word that comes out of my mouth. Right. And every emotion is my emotion, and all that. So
yeah, I think our cats understand us, but they don't really care.
They don't give a shit. So I'm going to say, so we talked about Rhine. So I'm going to read. So you have ESP Roars, East and West. Psychic Dreaming, interesting. Mind Over Matter, Classic ESP, Hauntings and Poltergeist, the Parapsychologist Handbook. And then I feel like I read that you're also currently working on a near death.
No, I'm not working on anything to do with near death directly. No.
Okay. No, this isn't directly. It was like you were something you're doing. Hold on.
Okay. I know what you're talking about. I actually co-authored a novel called Near Death.
Okay. Yes.
It's a paranormal mystery written with Rich Hozek and Arnold Rudnick. And it was the first in a series of paranormal mysteries involving a parapsychologist and a cop who had a near-death experience.
Okay.
The first one is called Near Death. The second one will be out. We have, I think, in June or July. We're just working on getting it to get it, finalizing it over the next month or so. And it'll be called Afterlife. And it's a part of our Rainy Day investigation series. Rainy, R-A-N-E-Y.
I saw Rainy / Day. Yeah, I got that.
Temperatures are rainy and day.
Yeah.
Now, it's actually based on a TV series that we tried to create a few years ago. We have our show Bible, so we're working off of that since we weren't able to sell the show.
That's awesome. I'm definitely gonna. Your books seem so interesting. Out of all of the things that you have written about or research, what's your favorite or your go-to? Your go-to.
That's a really good question. I think one of my favorite books that I've written over the years has been my book on mind over matter, just called Mind Over Matter, which unfortunately I just found out 3 weeks ago went out of print.
Oh,
So I have the rights back. I'll get it back out probably over the summer. I'm going to, self-publish it at this point. I'm kind of tired of publishers pulling stuff like this. So, but that was one of my favorite books, partly because I took a different tact, at least a more expansive tact on the book. I had I had been working before I wrote that book with a gentleman by the name of Martin Caden, who was a science and science fiction writer. In fact, I know Kenny mentioned Bigfoot on the $6 Million Man, and
yes.
and Marty co-created the $6 Million Man. His show was based on his book Cyborg, and he was a technical consultant with on Ken Johnson's show for a number of years. In fact, he appeared in one of the episodes, I think in the 5th season. He actually co-created the Bionic Woman as well. So Marty, when I met him, he actually had known my dad back when they were both covering the Mercury and Gemini space shot. So I was excited to meet him in '92. I was shocked as hell during our press conference for this 40 and research conference when he stated that he could move things with his mind, because I had not read anything that he could do that. Even though the last thing I saw him do on TV happened to be flying a restored German bomber, a Ju-50, a Junkers bomber, with 19 people walking on the wing of the plane. He was a larger than life character. Let's put it that way. He was also a consultant to NASA. Multiple times I visited him. He was constantly getting calls from the NASA press folks asking him to verify the history, because he was like the one guy who could remember it all. And Marty knew scientists all over and had studied. He was actually able to do PK. Pretty limited basis, but we did it under controlled conditions. He had been studied. I talked to researchers who had worked with him from NASA, who had worked with him under controlled conditions. And so that became the framework of the book. But in working with Marty, and I'd worked with a martial artist who could do some things back in the 80s at a research organization. I'd worked with some other folks. And my dad was a sports producer for most of his work. And I talked to a number of athletes who talked about unusual things they experienced. So the book actually goes from unusual human performance. So I think of it as exceptional human performance. We always hear those stories about the mother that's thrown out of the car and the car is overturned and it's going to burst into flames and the kid is trapped in there and the mother lifts up the car.
Right.
Try to find that in reports. It's hard to find. I actually met 2 doctors who examined somebody who had been thrown out of a car and had literally lifted up a car, or pushed up it was a pickup truck, and opened the door with her hand and snapped the seatbelt for the kid. It wasn't going to catch on fire, but pulled him out, witnessed by several people. And these 2 doctors didn't think anything of it, because we always think it's adrenaline. But when I asked the doctor specifically,
that's what I said. Yeah, I was going to say, I assume adrenaline.
Yeah, I said, what was the damage to the woman? And they said, scratch and bruises from being thrown out of the truck. I said, really? So she moved this heavy thing. One was an orthopedic surgeon, and they did check her for broken bones and anything. She didn't have any torn ligaments. She had no internal damage whatsoever. And when I pointed that out to the orthopedic surgeon, he just kind of looked at the other doctor, who was the ER doctor. And they both looked back at me and said, we missed an opportunity, didn't we?
Wow.
They did not feel that was, thinking back on it, that was not a possible thing. So then the question is, adrenaline can't do that. Adrenaline can't shore up your body. Something else is doing that. And the question is, what is doing that? And is it your mind that's doing that? So I took the tact of psychokinesis is mind affecting matter and energy. Our bodies are mind, are matter and energy to some extent. So we can do self-healing. We can do exceptional things. We can do a number of things. And I moved then from inside the body to outside, to going all the way to moving things in your mind, and included something from Martin Caden's journal on how he learned to do these sorts of things. So kind of giving people a little task that they could play with themselves to try to see if they could move objects, a particular type of object. At all. And then I also included a chapter on psychic fraud, because that's important as well.
Very important.
If you're going to look at somebody who's doing any sort of physical things like bending keys and things like that, there's a lot of fraud out there, and that's kind of an important piece. And I include a little breakdown of one of the frauds that I uncovered of that type. So it's my favorite book in that sense.
I'm definitely going to read that. That's very interesting to me. Megan says maybe stress makes us use a larger percentage of our brain to cause superhuman powers.
Well, and I don't know that it's more of our brain, but to me, it's the same unconscious thing that causes a poltergeist agent to be able to move an object, sometimes a big object.
That's what I was just.
Marty actually raised. Marty actually raised the question. He's like, "Are we sure the body is doing it, or do we think that their mind levitated the car and the person had to keep their hand on it, otherwise nobody would believe it, including themselves?" And that's a real interesting idea. I don't think that's what's going on, but that's really. Psychologically, we have a serious problem with witnessing unusual things that are physical.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that always made sense. I just said it was adrenaline. You know what I mean? Like, to me,
adrenaline can't do that. Can't make your bones stronger.
That's so crazy. That is so crazy because, I mean, I've seen people do things and I'm like, well, his adrenaline was pumping and, you know what I mean? And it's like, you just think
that's us getting out of our own way. One of the things that has really brought me into parapsychology and continues to keep me here is the idea, and this comes from my comic book background and science fiction background as much as anything else, that we have set limits on ourselves as human beings, both physical and mental limits, on what we're capable of. And our field, parapsychology, looks past those limits. It's trying to push those limits. That we may be more, what a human is, may be more than what we think a human is. And I think it's one of the reasons that I stick around in this field.
Well, I mean, we only use what percentage of our brain?
Yeah, that actually studies have shown that was a misquote of Einstein, saying something about 10% of our brains, but our brains are pretty active throughout. We may not use every neuron, but neurons are often firing throughout the entire brain. Even when we're dreaming, our brains are pretty active at that point.
Kenny's yelling at me. Myth, he says.
Yeah, the 10% brain thing is a myth. Yeah.
JD Sword, question. It seems to be the case that the effect size of alleged PSI phenomena is very small to the degree of which, even if it's real, it's not potentially dangerous. No, Professor
X. Yeah, I know, Professor. I know what he's talking about. Yeah, there doesn't seem to be that kind of conscious control of even what the amount of activity that happens in a poltergeist case when it comes to psychokinesis. And while there are people who can get information, maybe not to the extent that Professor X could, telepathically or otherwise. There's no superheroes in our world at this point that we know of. Maybe they're operating behind the scenes. But that's a lot of that. When it comes
Wait a minute, what? Kenny is not a superhero? Kidding. Go ahead.
Kenny's Batman, isn't he? No superpowers.
He's a paraceleb.
Yeah.
He's gonna hate me for that one. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And it's our psychology and everything we've been taught. Everything we've been programmed since we were little kids keeps it suppressed. I mean, kids are more psychic than adults. And we've seen that in so many examples and even in studies, but you're in a society that makes you feel weird if you're anything out of the normal. So psychic kids, not a good thing. They're going to get bullied or something else is going to happen. And their parents may think it's weird or demonic or devilish or something like that.
Right.
Or then they're in school and they're told that this stuff can't possibly exist. So everything shuts down. This is kind of like telling kids that they shouldn't be, if they're very creative or artistic, but the parents want them to move into like law or as a doctor, they kind of suppress the creative flow of that kid, or kids that are told that they're stupid by their parents, start believing it. So it really, what we're capable of is influenced by our environment. And it's unfortunate. I don't know that there ever would be a Professor X, but we do see some, possible negative applications of certain abilities, especially around the information and privacy issue.
Oh yeah, for sure. I was gonna say I don't know that how do you find the people to do the studies for? I mean, do they and what criteria needs to? I mean, do they have to go through certain psychological exams and this and that and this and that in order to be a case study for parapsychology?
Well, when talking about laboratory research, it depends on what the research is about. I mean, what's the research methodology that we're dealing with, what we're looking for. And there's a couple of things. First of all, J.B. Rhine back in the 1930s set the precedent of working with normal people, average people, because he firmly believed, and the evidence shows that it is kind of distributed amongst the population. So we will bring people in, but there might be psych testing because we also want to see what personality variables are connected to good performance in these tests. There is a whole segment, it's a small segment of research that goes on around spirit mediums. Julie Beischel at Windbridge Research Center is doing a lot of that, and there's a few others that are. And in her case, she put a number of self-professed mediums through a series of more and more and more controlled experiments to see whether or not they could perform what they claimed to be able to do under the most strict controlled conditions. And she ended up with 20, there are now 19, I think one dropped out, but there are 19 certified research mediums that the Windbridge Research Center actually works with in specific research. Sometimes that research involves biometrics, looking at what's going on in their heads, more or less. Mm-hmm. A lot of it is informational. And one of the things that she's kind of pioneered is a multi-level blinded experiment. We talk about double blind, where the experimenter who's running the experiment at the time with the participant doesn't know anything about what the experiment's doing or the results. This is a case where the experimenter who is talking to the medium on the phone does not know anything about the person the medium is doing a reading for, who is not on the phone. The medium is only told a first name to connect with. The person whose relative that is was told probably weeks before that on this date at this time, and even before that, mentally think of that deceased relative, and that deceased relative should find the medium who's actually doing the experiment. So there's so many levels apart that the only information the medium has to work with is that first name. And then the transcript is provided with other transcripts of similarly dead people from other mediums, so that the sitter, the person whose relative this is, has to pick out the right reading and actually score it according to that deceased person. And then they always remove the general information first, because there's statements that anybody can make. Right. That maybe it's from conversation with somebody, but it also fits 50 other people. So you got to remove that general stuff. So it's a multi-level judging process. It's a multi-level experimental process. And there's really good results coming out of this.
So, and then do the mediums, do they volunteer, or you guys approach?
No, they totally volunteer.
They volunteer. And then have you had any instances where you have I don't want to say disprove, that's the wrong word, but have had to tell a proclaimed psychic medium, like, listen, you should probably choose another career.
I actually have. I'm not in the research process, but I have. Now, in fact, a number of years ago, the Parapsychology Foundation had a conference on mediumship. And I wrote a paper on working with mediums in investigations, because I have worked with mediums and psychics. But I focused on two things. Number one, when you're working with somebody in an investigation, they have to provide useful information. That's regardless of what it is, it needs to be useful information. But on the other side of that, you could have the best psychic in the world, but in an investigation or in research, they're divas. It's all about them.
Right.
And that makes them not useful to work with.
Right.
And I've had people present themselves to me. They want me to take them on an investigation or test them otherwise. And not only do they not provide useful information, but it's all about them. So I said, on two fronts, I wouldn't work with you, and you shouldn't be doing this.
Right.
So Yeah.
So when you say field investigator, so you said you prefer to be you prefer to stay doing the field investigate.
Well, I don't work in the laboratory. I mean, I consult occasionally with laboratory research. I certainly follow it. I teach about it, but I'm not working in a laboratory these days. And I mostly, when I'm doing any sort of research on the subject, besides just talking to people, I am in the field, meaning I'm a paranormal investigator. I mean, I'm going to typically homes, but occasionally we have a few spots here in the Bay Area that I kind of go back to every so often just to talk to new witnesses. And
You would be so awesome to have on a team.
well, I try to advise teams. I'm sorry to say that so many ghost hunters that I talk to or meet follow the TV shows, and they're not happy that I tell them not to investigate in the dark. They're not happy about that. They're not happy that I tell them not to rely on these bits of equipment because they don't pick up ghosts.
Yeah.
We have to kind of look at what we're really dealing with. And one of the reasons we even started using things like EMF meters was not to detect a ghost, but to see if there was a correlation between when someone sees a ghost or has a haunting experience in a particular location. Is there an environmental change? Is there something in the environment that connects to that experience that is otherwise anomalous or unexplained? And then if there's something that is explainable, does that suggest to them consciously or unconsciously that there's a ghost there? So we have to kind of go both ways. But that's why we use that stuff. It has nothing to do with detecting a ghost.
Right. Yeah. I don't, and everybody that watches my show knows I'm not a fan of all the ghost made equipment. I don't use it. I listen to this. I can't stand him. Kenny.
Hey, Kenny, I know an expert you should ask about that. His name is Kenny Biddle.
So my friend Dan put this up. Animals can communicate without the power of speech. Do you believe humans have that capability, but simply don't know how? And when I put that question up, then my friend said, my dog literally drug his butt across the carpet in front of us. And as you posted that, we can't stop laughing. So that was the question.
So I guess the question is what that means by communication. Animals communicate with each other in different ways. A lot of it's nonverbal communication. We call that. Humans communicate nonverbally as well. One of the problems with email is a lack of transmission of nonverbals, which you'd even get in a voice on the phone. And people get in trouble when they're trying to put their sense of humor into an email and people take it seriously. Sarcasm doesn't translate, for example. That you have to have those nonverbals. There has to be a tone. There has to be something else. So animals communicate that way. Some animals communicate with pheromones. So there are a number of different ways that animals communicate. Whether they communicate psychically between each other is hard to say. There have been instances, and there's a whole small segment of parapsychology called ANPSI, ANPSI, which is animal psychic ability or animal psi. And that's looked at situations in which especially animals do what's called psi trailing, that, the family had to leave the dog or cat behind and moved across the country. And somehow several days later or a couple of weeks later, they hear from the person who kept the dog for them or kept the cat that it got out. And then several weeks later, that animal at a place that the animal had never been, the family had never been.
Yeah.
So there's something, especially when they've flown, there's no scent trail to follow at that point. There's something that allows some animals to do that sort of thing.
I would hope that all of my fur babies would do that. Like first of all, I would never leave them. I'm just going to put that out there. But if there was ever like a catastrophic something, I don't even know, and we were separated, because I would never leave them on purpose, but we got separated, I would hope. But I don't think so. I think my babies would be like.
So, I don't know. I know some people claim to be able to communicate psychically with animals. There are the pet psychics out there. I have a hard time with them from I wouldn't say from a parapsychological perspective, but from a common sense perspective, when they're giving whole paragraphs that the animal is thinking of.
Right.
you know, vocabulary. We do know that dogs and cats can understand certain number of words.
Right. Sure.
And there was even a recent study that shows that cats even do actually bond with their owners like dogs do. They just sometimes don't apparently care.
Yeah, I mean, I have luckily my felines have all been amazing and very attached and very loving.
Ours have too. Ours have
Yeah,
too.
so
But
I'm
you know, the idea that an animal is thinking in whole paragraphs or English language sentences rather than concepts, maybe a word or two that they recognize. They certainly can recognize that.
But do you believe they share the emotion and feeling?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think that we can all pick up emotion and feeling. I do think that they are feeling some emotion and.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if a dog, we had dogs growing up, and you could always tell when the dog was sleeping and dreaming.
Yes.
You could see the rapid eye movement, and then the animal was the dog was reacting to something.
Yeah. Don't you wish you could put like something on their head and you can just see what they're seeing? Like, I wish I just knew. I know. But we could do that with people too, right?
Yeah. Their nightmare might have been about getting the wrong food. Who knows?
Right. JD Sword. Do you sorry if I misspell anything, but psychotropic, am I saying that right?
Psychotropic, yeah.
Substances that alter the mind seem to help people break through those barriers and inhibitions, or is PSI phenomenon something that requires clear-headedness? That was what I was going to ask you, that if that is anything that you've ever studied, actually. So thank you, JD.
Well, I will tell you that before LSD was illegal and before mushrooms were illegal, there were researchers who were doing that work. I think now that there's opening up the ability to do research with some hallucinogens, it's possible for us to do that kind of research again. But all we can do that from an anthropological perspective, because other cultures do use psychotropic foods and substances like ayahuasca and things like that, mushrooms certainly. And sometimes it seems that they can open you up and certainly remove your inhibitions. Actually, there have been studies with people who are alcoholics, and people who are either inebriated or not. And
I was even marijuana now, it's legal.
Even marijuana, marijuana is legal. The question is, there was a study. One of the researchers I knew who did stuff with LSD way back in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s, said that one of the problems was when they were in that hallucination, maybe they were more psychic, but there was so much other stuff going on that getting them to focus on a target or be able to communicate it properly they couldn't pick it out. They couldn't tell whether the person was truly psychic or not.
Yeah. I mean, I think that would be kind of hard if they are under the influence, for sure.
Yeah, but there's a lot of studies of different altered states methods. Psychic dreams, for example, in the dream state, people do tend to have more, their inhibitions are lower, and there do tend to be really good indications of psychic ability. And there were studies back in the late 1960s at Maimonides Medical Center on dream telepathy, where there was somebody sending a picture to someone who was dreaming, and then they would wake them up at the end of that dream cycle, and the person could describe effectively elements of the picture that the individual was sending to them.
Wow. I would, oh my gosh. How do you get into like watch that? I mean, that stuff is so cool to me. Like, what about, now here's my ADD. Oh gosh. I just had this whole thing in my head that I wanted to ask you, but then you when I was like following your story, so I was like picturing the picture and like, what was I going to ask you?
If I were psychic, I could tell you.
Oh, I wish you were right now. Oh my gosh, can you read my brain? What about shoot. All right. Let's do this. Let's talk about the chocolatier stuff really quick.
Okay. We can talk about a second.
Sorry, because I can't remember what I was going to say or what I was going to ask you.
Okay.
But if I remember, I will definitely,
sure.
But so you're doing all this stuff, which is so amazing and so cool. Right now, you're just doing what? Paranormal investigating, correct?
Well, I mean, my main focus these days for this subject is education. I actually have a regular job too, because there's not enough money to support me just doing the paranormal work or parapsychology work. But for the most part, during the pandemic, couldn't do any investigating to speak of. So, and honestly, my folks don't get that many calls anymore because there's thousands of ghost hunter groups out there who
That's
do
probably
much better.
what we're doing.
Do much better at advertising and make wilder claims. I guess our claims are a little bit more subtle. I guess So
Yeah, it's very bad. I mean,
yeah,
luckily we have people like Kenny Biddle. We have there's a guy on YouTube. His name is The Shape. He goes after people on YouTube that are faking stuff and doing all kinds of stuff. So I appreciate people that are trying to crack down on those that are
I'm trying not to crack down so much. Although I do not talk in positive sense about the TV shows.
Right.
But I'm trying to bring them into the fold, trying to get them educated, and that's what I'm focused on. The courses I offer and that others offer through the Rhine Education Center are for anybody. And every year we teach a field investigations class. I'm teaching that starting in a couple of weeks. And then we have a secondary class. We have a whole certificate program for investigators. And that includes that skeptical course that Kenny and I taught. So
I want
that's
to do this
as well. And
this is online, right?
Yeah, that's where these are all online and they're all recorded, so people don't have to attend them at the time that we actually offer them live. So I've had students in all parts of the world at this point. So it's really it's a good way for people to get connected to the subject.
So where would I go if I wanted to sign up for your class? Like where would I go to do so?
You would go to Rhine, that's RHINE edu.org, or you could go to Rhine.org, RHINE.org. That's the Rhine Research Center, and just click on the Education tab for that, and that'll take you over to the Education Center as well. So that's the way to do it. You could also become a member of the Rhine Center, and there's like hundreds of videos of past lectures, including some lectures I've done for the Rhine Center behind there's some that are available for free. Mm-hmm. So you can watch those. And there's also a lot behind the paywall, meaning you have to be a member
right
to actually get to those.
That's so cool. As well. And then, so the certificate one, though, is that one that you would have to show up to the classes and take the classes and stuff? Are they still?
No, if you want the certificate, you do have to participate in the weekly discussion forums, but that's at your own pace. Mm-hmm. And you have to take depending on the class, we usually have a midterm quiz and a final quiz, and you have to pass. So it means you have to pay attention, but like a lot of online classes, the answers are presented in the lectures. And if you just went back over the lecture or actually the reading, you'd get, these are open book. I am surprised, honestly. I have a graduate class that I teach for Atlantic University. Mm-hmm. And I am often incredibly blown away when one of my students in that class doesn't get the answer to one of the discussion questions, considering the information was in the reading.
Right.
That means that they didn't read that, or that they didn't remember it and didn't bother to go back and check, which just doesn't make a good graduate student, certainly. So that blows me away.
I don't know if Desert Destinations High, any good stories about Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab?
So the PAIR Lab, which was Robert John, who was the dean of the engineering school at Princeton University. This was a laboratory looking at mainly the research they did. They did some remote viewing research because Brenda Dunn, his associate, had done that. And they also did a lot of research looking at how people could affect machines. So basically, it was that psychokinesis piece on random systems, whether they were within a computer or random event generator, or they had some big level ball drops, you might say, through a lot of pegs, a pegboard, which creates random distributions to see whether or not people could do that. And they did have some significant results. The thing about significant results in an ability like ESP or PK is, for most people, it's, we're going to see a very minor effect, significant effect, which is similar to what you see in most psychological effects, by the way. So humans are not repeatable, repeatable machines in many respects, but we do have repeatable experiments. And then you have things like the remote viewing experiments, which are leaps and bounds, and the Gansfeld experiments, which do provide a lot more significance to what's going on there. for that. But the Princeton material is actually available. You can actually get to that information. They put out a DVD and with all the information on it. Brenda Dunn is still active in the consciousness research world, and they do stuff all the time. Robert John passed away. And I remember the pseudo skeptics, the people who are disbelievers or really, attackers of our field, getting all excited that, Princeton eliminated the lab when the lab closed. Well, the lab closed because Bob John retired.
Right. And
It's
there was
just like-
nobody.
Yeah, I mean, he retired. He took it off. It was his baby. He retired. That was it. When J.B. Rhine retired from University, the Duke Parapsychology Lab, moved off campus. He kept the lab open, but because he was not faculty anymore, he was retired. He could not keep it as a Duke Parapsychology Lab. And
Duke,
it's a bit of misinformation we hear about all the time for these kinds
all
of
the
things.
time. I mean, then that's the thing. That's like, like look at all the stuff I heard, and then I bring you on and you're like, oh no, we love this stuff, Do you believe in aliens?
I assume you're talking about extraterrestrials.
Yes.
Here. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so there's two questions here. Do I believe that there's life out there? Absolutely. I think there is intelligent life in the universe, and I think maybe not too far away from us. I don't know if the UFOs are extraterrestrial in nature or what they are. I do know from even just my exposure with J. Allen Hynek and talking to him and him doing lectures at Northwestern and looking at files and kind of volunteering at the Center for UFO Studies, that there's a phenomenon that is, and he thought that some of what was perceived or experienced was more psychic projection, more people's psychological stuff. But there is definitely a nuts and bolts thing happening here. The question is, how much is extraterrestrial? Some of the things I know that have been seen have been experimental aircraft that the U.S. has played with. Marty Caden was an aviation expert, and he had some really good insight into that, especially having been in Army intelligence for a while and having an insider view in certain other areas from NASA and other places. But we're seeing so much nuts and bolts things that are not only on camera, but also on radar. Sometimes I think the things that are far away are tough to really judge. The things that are closer, especially witnessed by multiple people on radar and photographed.
And those black boxes, when you hear them talking and you hear them communicating with,
there's all sorts of stuff that there's something going on. Marty used to point out the fact that the Pentagon didn't know what to do about it. So they made it look like they knew something and were hiding it because that was better for the public from a
psychological,
psychological, emotional feeling that at least the Pentagon knows something. But if they thought that the Pentagon, that we don't know what they are, what they can do to us, we're freaked out just as much as you guys are. That would not be the American public.
Right.
Better that it looks like a conspiracy, that they pretend like they know something.
Right.
Yeah.
So I want you to talk about the chocolate.
Okay.
Let's talk about chocolate.
Chocolate. All right. So I've always been a food guy, and living here in the Bay Area, you are either into wine or you are not into wine, one or the other.
Okay.
And I certainly got into wine when I moved out to the Bay Area. And in the, I don't know, somewhere around 1990 or 90, or maybe a little bit later than that, a couple of the wineries that I was going to regularly started selling this chocolate from a company called Scharfenberger, which actually started here in the Bay Area. And I liked chocolate. I wasn't a big chocolate fan because I never really had great chocolate. And I had the Scharfenberger chocolate. And I was shocked at how different it was and how good it was. They really started the artisan chocolate movement. So over a period of maybe 10 years, I started really reading books about chocolate. There were more and more artisan chocolate makers mimicking what Scharfenberger was doing. So I had more and more really good chocolate. And I started doing kind of like my own tastings for myself and my friends, learning about it. And then one of my publishers, who unfortunately retired before she actually was able to make a deal with me for a book. I had intended to write a book on my journey, because she was her idea, your journey from becoming a chocoholic to a chocolate gourmet. And so I started interviewing in the mid 2000s when I started doing chocolate tastings. I started interviewing some chocolate makers, people who were actually making it from the bean to bar, as well as people who were names in the chocolate industry, like Joseph Schmidt. He was a big name here in the Bay Area and otherwise. And I visited Schmidt and at his factory, and as we're finishing the tour of his factory for my interview, he said I ended up walking away with 10 pounds of chocolate. It was crazy. 2 pizza boxes full of truffles and things like that. And he said to me, if you're really going to write this book, you should take a course and learn how to make chocolate, if not from bean to bar, but how to mix it, how to blend it, how I end up with things like what I make. And so we found it. My wife and I found a course online from a school which was incredibly well recommended by a number of people in the industry, which I highly recommend. École Chocolat, which is both here now in San Francisco and actually was centered there in Vancouver, British Columbia. It was an online course, but it was incredibly intensive. More work than they told me it was going to be, honestly. And part of it was a lot of making things. And so I earned my certificate as a professional chocolatier. For a while, I was selling chocolate, not in any sort of great batches, but I make small batches of solid chocolates with different flavors, and I called them ghost drops because I put little ghosties on them.
Oh my gosh, I need some. I want to buy some.
And I'll see about that.
Yes, I want some, please.
Yeah, I mean, I was selling them on the side, and I didn't have the time and energy to put into it, but I still continued to do guided chocolate tastings, and actually did a guided chocolate tasting long distance for the Monroe Institute for their staff. And I have done a few virtual chocolate tastings for folks over the last couple of years. I want to start getting back into doing them in person at some point, but It's fun for me to do that. But in between all that, one of the things that came up right as I was getting into this was Dean Radin at the Institute of Noetic Sciences ended up doing a study, an intentional chocolate study, based on the idea of folklore that food made with love is better for you, makes you feel better. So he worked with a company in Hawaii and did a blinded study with 4 samples. It was a pilot study. They never did a final huge study, but it was a pilot study with 4 samples of chocolate from the same batch. One sample was meditated over by a Buddhist monk in Hawaii. The meditation was, this chocolate will make the people who eat it feel more energized and with a better mood than any other chocolate. So more than normal. A second set was done with, it happened there was a Mongolian shaman doing some ritual thing at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. So he did a ritual over the chocolate as well. And then there was a third bit with some recording device that the guy claimed could record a meditative message. And then the meditation recording was played in an isolation room, a Faraday cage, with that sample of chocolate. And then the 4th sample was control. Nothing was done to it. And this was randomly separated to some volunteers who had to, for 3 days, have a little bit of chocolate at 10 o'clock in the morning and some at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And before and after they had the chocolate, they had to do a mood survey, kind of an actual physical survey. And then all that was gathered and sent along to Dean, who didn't know who had what or what sample was what. And the 3 samples that had some form of intention levied at them compared to the control group was 67% more mood enhancing, according to the surveys, than the control sample.
Wow.
So that's a pretty, and then he replicated that with tea as well down the road. So I actually brought one of the chocolate makers actually wanted to hear about that. So I took her to meet with Dean, and Dean told us all about the experiment. It's actually up online. You can find the research itself there. So, there's a crossover in parapsychology for this.
That's so crazy.
What it suggests is that you should never have food made by somebody who's having a problem at their job.
Oh.
In fact, one of the chocolate makers, Frederick Schilling, who at the time owned Dagoba Chocolate. It's now owned by Hershey. But Dagoba Organic Chocolate, which is out of Oregon, he owned the company. And we were talking about Dean's experiment when I interviewed him. And he said, well, that makes sense. When I hear anybody on the line is in a bad mood, I move them somewhere else. They don't get sent home, but people have to tell me what kind of mood they're in, and then they get put somewhere else in the factory so that they're not anywhere near the chocolate. Because he doesn't want people in a bad mood near the chocolate.
Wow. That's interesting.
Yeah, makes you think twice about buying anything at McDonald's that were, a 15-year-old or 16-year-old.
But that also makes sense to me. Like I always say, the McDonald's in Gettysburg is the best McDonald's ever. All the employees are always so happy when you go through there. They're so
there you go. There you
They're
go.
so nice. And then I get my food, and my cheeseburger is delicious. My French fries are perfect. I'm like, this is the best. And everybody laughs at me. I'm like, I'm serious. I'm like, I go to any other McDonald's, and they think it's just because I love Gettysburg so much, and they think it's,
maybe,
bias. But
there does seem to be something to be said about people who are happy, making happy food.
Right. And I mean, what's your favorite chocolate? Mine's dark chocolate.
Well, dark chocolate for sure, and I have favorite chocolate makers also. I get asked what my favorite chocolate is. It's really hard to say because I'm always trying new ones. I actually have 2 bars by 2 of my favorite chocolate makers here right now with me. One of them is probably my go-to all the time, and I order it online because they're in Hawaii. It's Manoa chocolate. This is one of their bars. This is their breakfast bar, which has got coffee in it, but they make phenomenal. I'm actually part of their, I am in their chocolate.
That sounds delicious. Is that dark chocolate and a coffee taste? Like dark chocolate and a coffee taste?
A little bit of coffee in this, but they make other chocolates.
No, I like
using
that.
beans from various places. They make a variety of different flavors as well. And they're in Kailua on Oahu. And I visited them a couple of years ago when I was in Hawaii and just fell in love with their chocolates. I'd had it once before, but they're just one of my favorites. And the other is Amano chocolate. And this is Dos Rios. So these beans are from a specific farm in the Dominican Republic. Every country's different regions and countries, like with wine and with coffee, you have a different flavor basis because of the soil.
But you know what? Just the pictures on the front, it looks so inviting. Like you just want
to. So this image was by an artist from the Dos Rios. So Art Pollard, who is the chocolate maker, who I've met a number of times, he has the labels created by a local artist from where the chocolate comes from.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
But I can tell you right now that if anybody wants to go out and buy some decent chocolate, this is almost at every supermarket. It's from Madagascar, which tastes a little bit like Raisinets, but it's just dark chocolate.
Yum.
So that's a really good one.
I want little ghost. I want ghost.
My ghost drops.
I want ghost drops.
I'll see. I have to think about whether I'm going to start producing those again. So.
Oh, please do it. You know how there's so Kayla Mina right here, she works at a store in Gettysburg. It's called Ghosts of Gettysburg. Dude, you could sell those ghost drops.
Yeah, the problem I've had is that I haven't been able to scale up my operation. That I would have had to have stepped away from some other things that I was doing and invest a little bit of money in more equipment. I think I could make the most I ever made in a single day, and I had to be in a commercial kitchen for an entire day, was about 500 pieces.
Oh my gosh. So, and I'd go to so many events. I would just sell them for you. I don't even want anything. I love it. I love the idea of
well, see, now if I had known that back, 8-9 years ago, we would have gone off and taken that and gone and run with it.
Well, listen, if you ever think about it, you got your girl right here.
Yeah, that is going to be my retirement plan, actually.
JD had a really good question earlier, so I'm just going to try to get to that really quick.
I see that. Yeah.
And this is a good question. That's why I wanted to make sure I asked. What do you believe we skeptics can do better with respect on how we engage with parapsychology, or believers in the paranormal in general?
Well, first, I think that knowing that there is research, and possibly even looking at the research itself, you might be surprised at the quality of research and what's reported and the detail that is in many of the research reports. My colleague Ed May, he and another researcher, Sonali Marwaha, a few years ago, produced a couple of volumes called Extrasensory Perception, Support Skepticism in Science. And Ed is really good at convincing skeptics who might never have touched a parapsychology paper to actually read some of the research. And so he included in basically the opinions and chapters from skeptics who then reviewed research and pointed out some failings, but actually were almost all across the boards were surprised at the quality of the research. Maybe not the interpretation, but the quality of the research, certainly. So that's one thing, is be aware of the research, and that ghost hunters are not researchers. No matter what they say, I always see them saying something about being in the paranormal field.
Mm-hmm.
That's not parapsychology. Yeah,
I say it. I'm guilty.
Well, that's not parapsychology, because most ghost hunters don't even know the word parapsychology. They don't know what it is. They don't think it has anything to do with apparitions, hauntings, and poltergeists. But actually, there's a lot of connection here.
See, now I always thought the opposite until I was told differently. Then I'm like, okay, now I want to know what parapsychology is. I always thought it was. And then, like I had Elliot Van Dusen on one time, and me and him were talking, and I was like so impressed with what he said, as I am too. Yeah. I mean, I love it. It's almost like my brain feels like it wants to explode, because I feel like it's so much.
The fact is, what we at least the way we conceptualize all this is you can't have ghost experiences unless you have they are psychic experiences.
Right.
Somebody who sees a ghost or has that kind of experience, it's a psychic experience, meaning it involves ESP and sometimes PK. And if you know nothing about ESP, or think it has nothing to do with anything in the field in real life, then you're going from the wrong direction, which is why the technology focus.
But what about not EVPs as such, but disembodied voices?
Well, here's an interesting question about, first of all, not everybody who has a ghost experience sees a ghost.
No, yeah,
they might feel a presence. They might smell something. They might actually hear a voice. Mm-hmm. It seems like we get the information in our heads, and then our perceptions process it, and our brain gives us back that picture or sound or whatever. So it's not out there, it's in here.
Right.
And that can be shared by by a number of people. The question is, if you hear a disembodied voice, were you able to record that voice? Right. And in general, like with photographs, you can't. In general, not all, there are exceptions to that, but in general, there's no audio recordings of the ghostly voices. When a medium talks to a spirit, there's nothing that's shown up on anything at all. And that's because it's a psychic experience. It's a mind-to-mind thing that's happening at that point. It's information from the environment. And the reason we're studying things in the laboratory is because people have these experiences, and we try to look at these abilities in the laboratory under controlled conditions. We'd love to have a ghost or two show up in the lab on a regular basis. Yeah, that'd be great. So far, not any luck. We'd love to have.
I just found out that that experiment in the movie The Entity really didn't happen.
Oh God. Can you imagine UCLA deciding to set aside one of their gymnasiums?
I thought it really.
I have to tell you that when I saw that movie, it was before, I knew Kerry Gaynor, who was one of the investigators. I hadn't met Barry Taff at all yet. When I saw that, and I actually talked to Frank DiFolita, the person who authored the novel, because it's really a novel based on the case. It's not the actual thing, but he was the one who suggested that in conversation with Thelma Moss. They came up with this idea that wouldn't it be kind of interesting if we did that? So he put it in the book. So it became part of the movie. And when I saw that, I'm thinking, because my dad was a sports producer, I'm thinking, yeah, I can just imagine one of the Big Ten coaches. What would happen if somebody suggested that a gym be used for spraying liquid helium around? That would have been the end of that individual's career at the university. So
yeah, I think it was Kenny that actually blew my bubble on that one, because he's like, that really didn't happen. I was like, wait, what?
It could not have happened. It wouldn't have mattered how much funding they had. They would have had to build a separate building, because none of the athletic department people would have ever let them do that.
So crazy. That is so crazy. And
I just mentioned one other thing for JD's comment about believers. I sometimes have problems with believers too. I'll be very honest with you. Yeah. There are true disbelievers who I have a problem with, but there are also true believers I have a problem with.
I'm with you.
And you just have to kind of stand there and just nod your head.
Yeah.
You
It's
can't.
unfortunate on this end of it, when you do investigate or you're out there and you're trying to do an investigation and you have somebody that you think is not being on the up and up, it kind of, you just should call the investigation right then and there.
Yeah. And as far as working with parapsychologists, I think the one thing skeptics have to be able to do is define themselves when they use that term, because for too many years, we've had people calling themselves skeptics be attackers of our field who are not skeptics. They are disbelievers. They are true disbelievers. James Randi was a true disbeliever. He was not a skeptic.
Right. Like they're like a ghost could sit down in front of him and say, "Hey, how you doing? I'm a ghost. I died in 1864." And, and he'd be like, "Okay, whatever. I must have drank too much ice."
Illusion. Some magician is faking me out. And I'd love to be able to do that to somebody, but holograms are not that advanced yet.
421BB. My grandpa worked for the Advanced Research Institute at Princeton. I just wanted to share that because we talked about that.
Cool. Very cool.
JD, question. With respect to the chocolate experiments, what was the hypothesis mechanism by which the intention adhered to the chocolate? Are we talking about more than just stress hormones like cortisol?
Well, first of all, the important thing to know about chocolate in general, one of the reasons it was chosen is because chocolate does have mood enhancing properties. Besides stimulants like a little bit of caffeine, it's actually got theobromine in it, which is a different kind of stimulant. That's actually why dogs can't eat chocolate, is because there is a problem with theobromine in dogs.
Is it chocolate or is it the like the cooking cocoa or the cooking?
Theobromine is toxic to many animals.
So it doesn't matter what.
Doesn't matter what kind it is. No, doesn't matter.
Okay, noted.
Yeah, and so tiny bits, but it just really depends on the animal. But there's also phenylethylamine, which is the substance that our brains produce when we're very happy and in love, which is why that connection. So it's a mood enhancer. And you can, I can say this from personal experience, you can get high on chocolate. I have had a chocolate high. I attended the Fancy Food Show, which is a big specialty food show years ago. One of the first times I went, there were so many people with chocolate. I was eating little bits throughout the day for 3 days. And I had never had such a great mood for a week afterwards. So the thought, it's hard to know what the mechanism is, what that intention is doing to the chocolate from a molecular standpoint, from a chemical process. And part of that is our field didn't, there was no one who had the ability to analyze the chocolate before and after at that level. And chocolate is actually, as it happens, is one of the most complex substances on the planet. So far, I recall a few years ago, I talked to a food scientist who was involved with looking at chocolate, that they had already identified over 1,000 individual molecular structures in chocolate. Wow. So trying to figure out which one might have been affected would be a massive project. And it would be great if we could actually do a big experiment with this. I have, that's the thing. I have suggested to some chocolate makers that we do this. The one thing that would have to happen, unless we get outside funding, is we'd have to charge people to be in the experiment. We'd have to charge them for the chocolate, which may have some ethical issues. So
like if I wanted to be part of the experiment, I would have to buy the chocolate?
We would have to have the sample of the chocolate that you would order to have shipped out, unless we got outside funding to pay for the chocolate maker to, because I would actually go to a specific chocolate maker and have, again, the sample split up into similar to what Dean did. But the thing is, I know for a fact that we could come up with any number of volunteers for this. It's just a matter. Yeah, it's a matter of whether it is ethical to charge our participants to participate in an experiment, or whether we can find research money to actually do that, a grant to actually do it.
All right, so if it's not like $1,000 or like if it's not like astronomical, I totally would be all in to buy my own chocolate.
No, I mean it would be like $10 or something.
No, I would. I'm
that's
totally
the thing.
into
it's not like it's an experiment that would cost a lot of money for any individual.
Oh my gosh, I know I could find people to do it.
Again, we'd have to run through an institutional review board, and there is a question.
Let's get on it, Loyd. I'm kidding.
Anybody out there who's good at writing grants, let's talk.
Let's do it. Look, everybody's like, let's do it. You know why? The only reason I'm saying this is because and I don't know if this was more of a psychological thing. Maybe it was, but green M&Ms were a little bit of an aphrodisiac for me for some reason.
I've heard that. Actually, I've heard that from people.
Really?
So is there something in the dye? Is there a difference in that particular green dye? Is the chocolate's the same?
Yeah, I don't know why.
Or is that a placebo effect?
Yeah, I don't know. I green M&Ms are seem to be my thing.
Yeah, we have so that experiment would be basically to put you blindfolded or in the dark, and for some people to be given green M&Ms and other people to be given other color M&Ms, and then again a survey done before and after to see how they feel, see if anybody can pick up whether or not it's just the green M&Ms that make people a little bit more frisky.
Yeah, I don't know what that is, but that's why I was, when you start talking about it, that's why I was like, I wonder if I'm like, that's something in my head, or if it's, if that's a thing, if there's a reason for this, I have no idea, but it's as long back as I can remember, and I had those when you start to get to a certain age and you start thinking about those things, I don't know. Well, I have had you for way longer than what I asked your time for. So I will, we can end now. However, I do want you to please give ways that people can reach out to you.
Sure.
Whether it be through your classes and however anybody can get a hold of you if they have any questions, or if they want to do your classes, or if they want to order some ghost drops.
Ghost drops, not right now.
I know, I'm kidding.
But in the future, my business is called Haunted by Chocolate. That's what my business is.
Haunted by Chocolate. I love it.
Maybe one day I'll get around to actually writing the book.
You should really do it. You should really do it.
I envision I have a very specific vision of a store down the road. So, which again, when I retire, we'll look into that. So getting in touch with me, my email, I'm going to give out my email, is Prof Paranormal, PROF Paranormal, like Professor Paranormal, @gmail.com. And you can also get me at Loyd Auerbach @gmail.com. You just have to make sure you spell my name correctly. It is only with one L. And if you're using an iPhone, it's going to turn my first name into Loud instead of Loyd. I have problems with iPhone all the time with that. So, and then you can follow me on Twitter @Prof Paranormal or @Loyd Auerbach. You can find me on my Facebook page, my author page. I can't take friends anymore because I'm topped out at the 5,000, but I do have an author page, which is loyd.auerbach.author. It's facebook.com/loyd.auerbach.author. And every other Sunday, I do a Ask Professor Paranormal question and answer session, Facebook Live.
Really?
The next one is going to be, I guess it's May 1st. And it's at 5:30 Pacific, 8:30 Eastern. I post that on Twitter. I post that on my LinkedIn page. I post that on all of my pages on Facebook. So with the link, it is on how to watch it and how to participate in that.
You do that every Sunday?
Every other Sunday.
So I not to put you on the spot, you don't have to answer, but I am part owner of a streaming network. So if you'd ever want to stream that on BB3 TV.
All right, we'll talk.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
I mean, make you an editor, you just stream it right over, or you can share it if you wanted to upload it later. You know what I mean? Whatever.
Yeah.
I'm totally looking forward to, because I want to have you on again. There's like so many questions still and so many things to talk about. I mean, this subject has fascinated me for a very, 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 very long time. So I'm so happy that I've opened up, a door where I've had like Elliot on and then you on, and, and hopefully you guys will come on again. Elliot said he would. And I just love the conversation tonight. Was great. And I appreciate your time. And I I will be awaiting ghost drops. I'm sorry. I'm probably going to bug you about it. Okay.
Just, every so often drop me an email and remind me. And if I make a batch, I'll put some aside for you because I do some.
I'll do a little ghost drop. Let's go. Let's go.
They're discs. They're handmade. So, I mean, they're hand dropped. So I basically take a scoop and drop it, and it creates a nice round disc, but it has ghosts on it.
That's
There's a transfer sheet for that.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Loyd, for joining us. And I look forward to whatever else you got coming. Do you have anything coming up that you can share? Like anything, basically, I mean, your class, when's your next class?
Well, the next class again starts on my field investigation class starts on Wednesday, May 4th.
Okay.
I'm teaching a course on the 3rd, starting on the 3rd, called Paranthropology, which is a cultural approach to psychic experiences. So it's a combination of parapsychology and anthropology.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Which is more of a discussion session. And our next session after that, I'll be teaching a Developing Your Intuition course in August for the Rhine Center, a shorter class on that. And we have a lot of other courses coming up. We usually take July off. The Parapsychological Association convention, which is it's a virtual convention this year in conjunction with the Society for Scientific Exploration, will be June 23rd through 26th. You can just simply find out about it by going to parapsych.org. So forget the ology, just parapsych.org. That's the Parapsychological Association, or scientificexploration.org, which is the Society for Scientific Exploration. So that would be a good thing for folks to go to.
Yeah.
There'll be some other things, other events from time to time that I'll be working on and planning on.
Do you post these on your page, on your private page and stuff, and on your pages?
I do.
Because I'll share them out. I want to share them, and I do want to. I'm in love with. You're gonna laugh, but I said I usually have wine and stuff on my shows, and I'm like, no, I'm like, smart people make me nervous. I'm like, it's very.
You should have told me. I was drinking. I think when I did the thing with Kenny. I'm perfectly happy to have a glass of wine or a beer or a sake in front of me. That's I didn't know.
Oh my God, yes. No, Paranormal Brew. I mean, that's where I, kind of originated around coffee and beer, and because I said some of the best conversations we have is when we're just sitting around talking, I have something starred for some reason. Oh no, I already shared that with you.
Next time we can talk about how to pair beer and chocolate together. So.
Yes, I'm in. Yes, Amber, I'm sorry, dear, you did miss it. It's great. Please go back and watch it. You'll love it. Loyd, thank you. Well, we will have to schedule another date because an hour and 48 minutes wasn't enough time.
Okie dokie.
But I appreciate it. And we had a great audience. Everybody saying how good the show was. And I look forward to getting in on some of your classes because I am totally into all of this. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for continuing to try to educate and doing what you can, for paranormal investigators for sure, who are open to learning from you and not Zach Baggins, which I wish people would do.
Learning for TV ghost hunters is like learning to be a cop from watching the TV show Cops. Not a good idea.
I mean, I do have it. When I was like in the beginning, I will say that, Ghost Hunters was kind of my, I watched Ghost Hunters and that's about all I watched. And I still watch Ghost Hunters. I do look up to Jason and Jason Halls and stuff like that. I do think he's, a good guy. And more real of an investigator than what most are, on the shows. But that's it. That's always been my one and only is Ghost Hunter. So other than that, I'm with you on the TV shows for sure. But everybody is saying how good the show was and they're sharing out. So I appreciate you coming on and
Sure.
I look forward to further to hanging out with you further.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Wow. Kenny, thank you for that one. Thank you. That was great. He was great. I love him. So love him. Gonna have him back on again for sure. He's gonna be a repeater. He was great. Amber, please go back and watch it. You will love it. And Amber, you also are supposed to get with me about streaming onto BB3 TV, your investigations. Girlfriend. But yeah, Darren, for sure. Mind blown. It really was a great show, and thank you, Sharon. Next week I have a wonderful guest coming on next week, Charlie McBride. For all of you that do not know this wonderful human being, she is a spiritual mentor. She's a shaman. She is also one of our hosts on BB3 TV, and she will be joining me next week. Please do not miss it. She, either are we friends on Facebook? Either message me, direct message me. I'm sorry, either direct message me, or I'll friend request you. I thought we were friends already, Amber, but I will definitely friend request you. But next week I have Charlie McBride coming on. I'll private message you. Okay. Okay, I will. Charlie McBride, you don't want to miss it. She's amazing. Medium, psychic, shaman. I'm not good with because of my ADD. I'm not drinking any wine. I didn't drink any wine. I'm about to, but I didn't. I actually was sober for this interview because I was a little nervous because he's a very smart person and I didn't want to be goofy and, all that stuff. Not that anybody else that I've had on, please, disclaimer. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, you guys know. I mean, I don't mean it that way. So, I am going to drink my wine. But, so I have Charlie. Then the following week I have Haunted MD, another great guest. Another great guest coming on. He's amazing. I've had him on quite a bit. The following week I have Bill Slevin. And then I am doing Spooky Sundays. So I have a couple of shows scheduled for Sunday. Mark Skygel is one. Let me see. And also John Ruggiero and Chris Therian, they are also going to be on before Para Unity, before their event Para Unity. I have Shadow Zone Paranormal coming on May 18th, who they started a whole big thing. They started Global United Network. I hope I'm not going to say this right. PD Paranormal, I think it's called. Please, that's probably wrong. But if you go to Global United Network, you definitely will. Oh, thank you, Amber. You heard Oh, thank you. You heard in a ghost spoke up. I'm sorry. I know there's probably a language barrier there. And I want to say your name right. Is it sounded like Arn, like ARNE? Or is it, am I saying that wrong? I apologize. I saw you were on and some of the things I was not ignoring you, I promise. So I hope you join me next week. And you join us next week, and going forward. I will be on a show, the freaking awesome paranormal show on the June 7th. June 15th, I have Dustin Pari from Ghost Hunters International coming on, which is going to be awesome. So make sure you show up for that. Okay, so I'm saying that right, but the keyboard needs a new one. Gotcha. That does stink. I apologize. The 22nd, I have David Glidden coming on. He actually is holding a haunting history Paracon. So he's going to come on to promote that, which I think is great. 6/29, y'all. I'll be playing a repeat because I will be at the New Kids on the Block concert. It happens to be on a Wednesday. I am not missing my NKOTB. So I will be replaying an episode that night. But before that, that Sunday, one of my spooky Sundays is, like I said, is John Ruggiero and Chris Therion. That'll be June 26th. July 6th, I have Holly Mullins coming on. We'll be talking about astral projection, out of body, telepathic, near death. We'll be talking about all that stuff. Astral projection, out of body, all that. July 15th, 16th, I'll be at Hinsdale. The 20th, I have Mike Ricksecker coming on. The July 22nd, I'll be at Para Unity. Definitely will be going live from there. And then the Gettysburg Battlefield Bash for sure. And then Hinsdale House again in September. So that's what I got coming up. Also taking April Busette, the Psychic Housewife of New Jersey. I'm taking her class. There's 3 classes that she's got. So make sure you go check her page out if you guys are interested in psychic medium stuff. We must be the same. Are you going? Are you going to the concert? Oh my God, if you go, oh, they're the best. Oh my God, I would love to be able to get into the Hinsdale House. Well, I don't know how far away you are. And I don't know, maybe we can set something up one time, you know? Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to go this week, tomorrow I have to. So Friday, just so you guys know, Friday, I don't think I'll be able to use my phone, but Friday I have tickets to go see Josh Gates. He's touring and he's doing like I guess a stand-up, not a comedy thing, but like a talk. And he will be at the Wellmont Theater on Friday. So I will be going to see Josh Gates, which will be really cool. And then Saturday, I will be live doing an investigation at Strauss Mansion with my peaches. No, it was strong. So I'll be doing an investigation at Strauss Mansion with the peaches, but I will be live. I know. He's so awesome. He really is awesome. I met him once at Phenomenology. He's a great guy. And then Sunday, if you guys can, please, I'll share it to Paranormal Brew. But Studio 6 Paranormal, Jay Hill, this Sunday, I'll be co-hosting with him. The woman that owns Ghost Town Terror, the show Ghost Town Terror, she's the woman that owns it, is coming on as his guest. So I will be helping him out, co-hosting with him for that. And that is this Sunday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Central. I forget if Central's behind us or after us. I think it's behind us, behind Eastern. Yeah. The Hinsdale House, is that what you're talking about? Yeah. You're going to be there at Wellmont Theater? That's so awesome. Maybe I'll see you guys if that's where you're going to be. That's so crazy. All right, guys. I've taken up enough of your time. There's also an awesome show on. Krista Cesare has been on for probably a half an hour. Please go check his show out on BB3 TV. I hated to butt into his time, but I couldn't hang up with Loyd. So, yeah. That's fine. We can talk through calling. That's fine. I'll call you. Anyway, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Please join me next week. Please join me. on Sunday with Jay Hill, Studio 6 Paranormal, and all that. And I love everybody. Thank you so much. See you guys.